This is week 1, Understanding and Using Student Development Theory. And in this session, we'll talk about how student development is defined and why student development theory is a basis for the work that we do. So student development is actually defined in a number of ways. Rogers talks about it being the way that a student grows, progresses, and increases his or her developmental capabilities as a result of being enrolled in an institution of higher education. And Sanford talks about it being this positive growth process that where an individual becomes increasingly able to integrate and act on many different experiences and influences. So it's very different than simple change, because simple change is either positive or negative, but Sanford really stresses that it's movement forward, it's positive growth. And thinking about how he talks about it being they're increasingly able to integrate, I was trying to think of a way to sort of illustrate or describe integrative learning. And the thing that came to mind, my daughters, I have twin daughters, they're 5 years old. And if I were to go to them and I would ask them, Kate and Maggie, how would you describe a sheep? They would probably tell me that it's something very fluffy and cute and white, because that's what they know from their storybooks. That's what they've seen in Mary Had a Little Lamb. But if I were to take them to the zoo, to a farm, and what a real sheep looks like, I think they'd be surprised to see that they're actually really dirty, they have matted fur, they're not very smart. And so it's not to say that their initial understanding is wrong, it's just not fully developed. And so many of our students are coming to our college campuses with this initial set of ideas or understanding, and it hasn't been developed. And so student development is about the set of experiences that happens while they're in college that really makes it, helps them be able to grow and to learn more and expand their understanding. So Evans et al., this is the textbook that we're reading for this course, talks about student development being a basis for the practice of student development. And I love how they describe it being kind of this idea of that as student affairs professionals, we're able to proactively identify and address student needs, to design programs, to develop policies, create healthy college environments. This is all really important. It's really essentially what we do. And so thinking about that as being the basis, it's really providing the understanding in order for us to be able to address student needs, to do all these things that they're calling as kind of essential for student affairs practitioners. So theory is based on hypothesis and supported by evidence. Basically, we take what we see as a series of patterns, we kind of have an idea of what they're experiencing, and we test it through research. And so it is supported by evidence, it is justified, but the thing that we need to keep in mind is that we have to come at it in a very objective way. We need to keep in mind that students are really coming from very different experiences that with varying background characteristics. And so while the majority of students might kind of progress through their development in a certain way, we also have to keep in mind that we have to be objective, because not every student will have a similar experience. And it's a body of common knowledge that allows us to make connections between people and events. It basically creates a language for us to speak. It gives us this ability to sort of understand and speak about our students in a similar way, and it creates this language for us. So there's a number of different uses of student development theory. It can be used as a simple description. It tells us what's happening. It could be as an explanation, maybe helping us understand the cause of behavior. Maybe we would understand why a student is struggling in a class or not even coming to class. As a method of prediction, it maybe could help us understand a developmental outcome. And then also as a control, to be able to control for what we know that typically students will be going through and what they'll be experiencing. When we evaluate theory, we really need to keep a set of questions in mind. These are really helpful in thinking about how we approach theory and how we look at it. Maybe asking, what population is the theory based upon? Who was studied in creating this theory, and what group did they represent? How was it developed? What were the methods of study? How did they go about collecting this evidence base that we talked about earlier? Is the theory descriptive and explanatory? Is it prescriptive? Is it useful in practice? Are we able to apply it? Can we, use it as this common language for this is why we know students are struggling in this certain area, or why we predict that they might sort of respond in this way? And then finally, does it generate research ideas? Does it sort of propel us in wanting to continue on to test and try new uses for the theory, or perhaps create new ones? Also, there are 4 categories of student development theory. We look at it from a psychosocial angle, which is basically development as a series of tasks or stages that students sort of progress through. Cognitive, which is changes in thinking and evolving frames of references. Typology, distinctive but stable differences in learning styles, personality type, socioeconomic backgrounds. And then finally, person-environment, how the environment influences behavior. So these are the 4 categories that a lot of the theories will fall under. And in speaking about environmental factors, there's a number of important sort of characteristics that I really wanted to mention. Nevitt Sanford, we talked about him earlier talking about positive growth process in defining student development. He talks about challenge and support, that you really have to have a good balance of both challenge and support when you're working with students. Because if you give them too much challenge, they might retreat, they might not grow, they might not move forward. But if you offer them too much support, it might be the same problem. You really have to find a healthy balance. Alexander Aston talks about involvement being a really key piece to student growth and progress. When they're engaged in and beyond the classroom, when they're in extracurriculars or in the when they're involved in the co-curricular setting, that's really what's helping them retain at the institution, to promote retention and keep them from dropping out. Marginality and mattering are both really important in terms of this sense of belonging. Every student wants to feel like they belong, that they have a place at the college or university where they are. And then finally, validation. Rendon talks about this need for supporting students, for them to feel like they really do matter, and that there's a place for them, that they're validated as students. I want to encourage you, when you are looking at student development theory, that you really come at it from this holistic approach. We have to look at all aspects of the student. And it's really important to really know how they're developing intellectually and emotionally, but if you leave out, physical and spiritual, you're really not able to fully understand, because these are so closely connected. So that's kind of that bedrock of student development theory, is that we approach the whole person, that we have this very holistic approach to student development. So in review, we look back at how we define student development, and Sanford talked about it being a positive growth process, this forward movement. That theory is based on hypothesis and supported by evidence. That there's a number of uses of theory. It could be used to explain, to describe what students are going through. That there are categories of student development theory, that basically theory falls under those 4 areas, whether it's psychosocial or intellectual development. That environmental factors have a tremendous influence on student behavior and student growth and development. And then finally, that we come at student development with this holistic approach. We really have to consider all areas of the student if we're going to be able to help them with their growth and their development. So I hope this gives you a good understanding for kind of where we're coming at with student development and theory as a basis for the work that we do.